May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts always be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. At first, this section of the reading we heard from St. Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians sounds pretty straightforward. Turn away from idleness and get busy. Get to work. Just like the bumper sticker that reads, Jesus is coming, look busy. Or as the old saying goes, of course, idle hands are the devil's playground. Well, idleness, of course, is not very much in these days. Ask anyone how they are, and chances are that the first reply they will make is busy. Being busy turns out today to be a status symbol, a sign of how much you are in demand, or of how many demands may be placed upon you at any given time. But as with so many biblical passages, this one at second glance turns out to be far more complicated and yet far richer than we might have first expected. In fact, I would contend that it reveals at least four very profound truths, not only about biblical theology and morality, but about life in general. Truth number one, be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. Paul has been preaching to the church in Thessalonica for some time now, warning as he did in his earlier letters that there was the imminent return of Christ to earth, and that the church there should be prepared for that return. It reflects the early Christian church's anticipation that Christ would soon come back to earth and usher in a new age. Well, it turns out that many of the folks who heard Paul took him seriously. They believed, in fact, there were rumors floating around that Christ had already returned to earth. So, in face of all of this, many of the Thessalonians were indeed getting ready for Christ to return, taking heed of what Paul said. But for many of them, it meant literally giving up everything that they were doing in preparation for Christ's return. After all, if you are too busy, you might miss it all. Taking him seriously and dropping everything to receive Christ, some of the Christians at Thessalonica were simply sitting around and waiting for the return, believing that this was the best way to prepare for the new age. Why work, they reasoned, if Jesus' return is right around the corner? Why risk not noticing or not being there for the big event? So Paul is faced with the dilemma that people took him seriously, so seriously that they were prepared to suspend everything they were doing just to live in total expectation. Be careful of what you ask for. You just might receive it. Number two, you can never guarantee that people will hear exactly what you say. Paul was in a very frustrating situation with the church in Thessalonica. Hence the stridency of the wording in his message today. He commands the Christians to keep away from believers who are idling away their time. In spite of what some people think the Bible is all about, we don't hear Paul or others use the word command very often. But things have gotten confusing in the church there. Not an unusual thing for the church to experience, confusion. Even they've gotten out of hand. He refers to those who are idle using a Greek word which has military connotations that has to do with those who in a disorderly fashion disobey. Things seemed out of control. The idlers were not team players in his view. This was not the tradition he claimed, he tells them. But you can almost hear some of them respond, but you told us to live in expectation of the return of Christ. Yes, I did, Paul might have heard to be said, but I didn't mean that, referring to their idle posture. How many of us, trying to be as clear as we possibly can, still find ourselves at times misunderstood? You can explain and explain and explain, but that is no guarantee that you are going to be heard in the way you want to be heard. Notice how many times politicians will preface what they want to say in answer to a question, "Let me be perfectly clear." They know that there are people out there who are going to pick up on one thing and amplify it out of proportion, or pick up on one thing and not hear the grand sum of what is being said. No one can control what other people hear from them. That is not something that is guaranteed in life. And as many people have discovered, it often takes repeating what you mean over and over and over again before it begins to sink in. People will hear or not hear what they want, regardless of what you tell them. Number 3, more often than not, two people can disagree on something for entirely good reasons. Not only did some of the Christians at Thessalonica believe that this is what they wanted to do in preparation for the return of Jesus, many felt that's what they should be doing. That was the right thing in their view to do. And while Paul lays into the idleness of these folks, claiming it's a cause of confusion and disorder, and it's certainly not what he meant, many of the idlers were looking down on the rest of the Christians in the church there, saying they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were not following the right path in order to receive Jesus when he returned again. Give up on worldly possessions and busyness. That was the right thing to do in their view. Those who were not prepared to do that, the idlers would say, possessed an inferior faith. So we have two different interpretations of the same situation: to live in expectation of the return of Christ. Both sides contending that they had the right answer, the right response. Sound vaguely familiar with many situations we see and hear today? Retired congressman recently said, "We are very much in need of demonstrations that we can respect each other, that we can debate all sorts of issues without accusing our opponents of being either evil, immoral, or corrupt." I would contend that one of the two biggest ethical challenges we face today has to do with accepting the fact that people can disagree with us for perfectly sound reasons. That perhaps even those who disagree with us have legitimate grounds for disagreeing with us. Whatever we believe or feel, that one side does not have exclusive possession of the truth. How much easier it is to attack the other person who disagrees with us, to think the truth is solely in our possession, and those who disagree with us simply do not have a clue. How much more we're tempted to undermine their viewpoint and dismiss it in whatever way we'd like to. The last truth. Doing the right thing can make us weary. In case you haven't noticed, doing the right thing in whatever context is not necessarily the easy way out. In fact, in many cases, it is the far more difficult thing to do. Doing the right thing causes as much challenge and difficulty as not doing the right thing. That is what the Spanish marathon runner Fernandez Anaya learned last December. Running in a marathon race in Navarre, Spain, he was touted to be the runner-up for the race, behind famous Kenyan runner Abel Mutai. And indeed, going into the last stretch of the marathon race, he was in second place. But as he rounded that last stretch, he saw a very strange sight. Mutai, the front runner, had stopped about 20 feet short of the finish line. Apparently, he thought he had completed the race. But there's a very confused look on his face because all of the crowd that is surrounding him is trying to tell him that no, you have not finished the race, you have 20 more yards, and that the finish line is over there. But Mutai did not understand Spanish. Anaya sees the confusing scene, the look on Mutai's face. And instead of bypassing him and winning the race that he was scheduled to be the runner-up for, he goes up to Mutai, escorts him to the finish line, and lets Mutai finish ahead of him. An extraordinary gesture that got him a great deal of press. But not all of the reaction was positive. Certainly from his coach, it was not positive. Why miss up an opportunity like that? Why give in like that? Anaya, no doubt, was touted as a hero by some, but he realized that doing the right thing sometimes can make us weary. Here is where it is all the more important that we hear Paul exhorting us not to lose heart. For as Jesus says in the gospel for today, doing the right thing, standing for something, is an opportunity to testify. It is an opportunity to witness to the faith that is in us. It is an opportunity to teach. Doing the right thing helps people around us, even if we don't realize it, to learn. It helps people to think about their lives, to consider the direction and texture of their lives. It is to pose one of the most difficult questions we can ask ourselves in the face of sheer goodness unfolding before us. Am I capable of that? A very mundane example from my own life. Last week I was preparing to enter the New York subway. And as I approached the entrance turnstiles, I got out my Metro card and swept it on the machine, and it registered as insufficient fare. Set the Metro card aside, got the other one in my possession out, swiped that, again, insufficient fare. I must have let out a very frustrating groan. I had not noticed that all during this frustrating experience, someone was watching me from the other side of the turnstiles. Now, Mary Oliver is right when she tells us that to pay attention is our endless and proper work. And to my good fortune, someone was paying attention to my situation. A man approached me, extended his Metro card over the turnstile, and said to me, "Here, use this." Being kind of in the New York mode, I dismissed, said no thank you, and lived with my frustration. But he insisted, "Here, use this. This is what it is for." Caught completely off guard, not to mention being humbled, I finally thankfully accepted his offer, ran the card through the turnstile, and gave it back to him once I was on the other side. A very simple experience. But the episode left me wondering, would I ever do that? Would I ever be so attentive to what was going on around me that I would go out of my way to help someone like that? Would I ever look up from my preoccupations and notice, and would I act if I noticed it? That's some of what I think Jesus is talking about when he says, it's a time to testify, and that the words and the wisdom will be supplied. For that is what doing good does to all of us. For when we see it unfolding, we are confronted with a much-needed challenge to our lives. Could we do the same? Are we capable of it? It turns out that doing good is the most important teacher of all, for it spurs others to consider their lives, to put themselves into the position of doing such good, and to wonder if they're capable of it. Well, maybe it is true that we should beware of what we ask for, that no matter what some people say, they will not hear what we want them to hear, that the person who holds a contrary viewpoint to mine may in fact do so for reasons as solid as my own. Yes, those may be true, and it can make us all at times weary. But we carry on. We try not to lose heart. We have opportunities to testify, and the words and wisdom will be supplied to us. We live our lives in attentiveness and hope. And like Mr. Anaya, we would not want it any other